Hello and welcome. My name is Colbey Decker and I'm pleased today to share with you how to make Little M's beach bag. A couple unique features about this bag include I've decided to use buttonholes instead of traditional grommets. And the other feature is there's a hidden pocket on the inside of the bag which will allow you to put your little guy or little gal's pool money, their beach ID, or any little thing that they want to hide and have near them. So let's jump right in. The tie fabric and the strap fabric are the same dimensions, and don't worry about writing all the dimensions down. It's all going to be online for you to access, but they're constructed in the same way, so I'm going to show you all at once. So I've started off, it's 2 inches wide, and I've done a half fold in on each direction. So once you do your 1/2 inch fold, I've pressed it, gone ahead and folded it in half yet again, and pressed it. Now the unique thing about the straps, you don't have to finish the end, so that's already going to be taken care of. It'll go on the inside of this bag once it's fully constructed. So you simply edge stitch the entire length, and this is what the strap is going to look like. Now for the tie, because you're going to see the ends of it, we're going to go ahead and clean it up a little bit. So it starts off like the regular ties. I went ahead and made a triangle point and pinned it, or I pinned it and then pressed it into place and then folded it over one more time. Now it is really close and it's going to be really tight, but what you want to do is be careful when you iron it. You could, careful your fingernails, but it's worth it. Once you create that triangle, then you fold it over just like you did for the other ones, and it's created in a nice clean edge. You do that on both ends and then edge stitch it. Okay. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to work on the interior bottom. All 4 pieces for the bottom are exactly the same size. So what we're going to do is start with one of the circle templates, and I have 2 more additional circles. I'm simply folding them in half and matching them up. Now the interesting thing about this is to give it a little bit more structure, I have an iron-on stabilizer on the back. It's just going to give it a little bit more body and it's going to have a little bit more heft. So I'm going to pin a couple of these on, and you can sew them, you're going to actually base them. So don't worry about your back stitching at the beginning of the end. You're going to go ahead and just edge stitch to get it temporarily held in place until you add it into the interior of the bottom. So you just sew all the way around with the edge stitch, and that's done. So we'll set this aside and you'll see how it's used later on. Now we're going to work on piecing the exterior to create this nice 2 fabric look. I take my 2 pieces of fabric, right sides together, and I've already pinned them together. We're going to go ahead and take it over to the sewing machine and edge stitch. And I always forget my pins. You don't want loose pins hanging around on your work surface. So I've already got my machine set up. I am going to back stitch at the beginning and the end, and back stitch. Now the nice thing about this is it creates a fun way to have 2 different types of fabric. You can have a really busy fabric and a lighter fabric. You can do 2 different solid tones. It's a nice way to show your imagination and creativity. Just keep going. All right, we're just about done. Here we go. All right, back stitch. Have my needle go up, cut it. So now what you would do is you would press that seam, and I'm not pressing it open, I'm actually pressing it towards the darker fabric, and that's going to help. And I'm going to show you what you would do next. I already have it, the magic of television, is I already pressed it with that same stabilizer. I've used the same iron-on stabilizer throughout the entire project. Okay, flip it over here. And the other thing you're going to notice is I edge stitched along the darker color fabric. I did this, even though it's an iron-on stabilizer, you want to have that extra support so it doesn't pull away from the stabilizer later. And it just gives it a nice finished look. So the next step we're going to do is we're going to add the straps on. So I've measured in 1.25 inches along the top and marked it, and 2 inches along the bottom. And again, don't worry about writing all the directions down, they're going to be online. The one thing you want to make sure of, actually the two things, is you want to make sure your strap doesn't get twisted, and you want to make sure that the seam on these straps is coordinating. It gives it a much better, a much polished look. So I know that they're going in the same direction, and I've got my pins back over here. I'm just going to pin it in place. I'm going to do a quick basting stitch just to hold it. And while I'm over at the sewing machine, I'm going to go ahead and do the seam, the side seam. And that's going to be a 1/4 inch seam allowance as well. Okay, so this one's already been done, but we're going to take it over to the sewing machine. Just a nice edge stitch, no need to back stitch, we're just tacking it in place until we get where we need to go. Simple as that. And then we're going to do the top one. Now make sure you don't get your strap or tie stuck in part of your sewing. Just kind of keep an eye on where they are. I've done that before, and it's not fun to have to get your seam ripper out to undo your tie from the side of your bag. Okay. So now that I have the two ties both on, or the straps, excuse me, we're going to fold it over with right sides together, and we're going to do a 1/4 inch seam allowance all along here. Now, don't worry, you would pin, you could pin, you should pin, to be honest with you, but I'm going to go ahead and just sew it. And I am going to do a back stitch at the beginning and the end. All right, here we go. I'm just going to go a little bit slower when I go over that point where the fabric had already been sewn, just to make sure the needle can handle it. I'm going to back stitch, and then we're going to go ahead and add our bottom, our circled. So I've got my bag, and this is the bottom, and I've got the exterior circle. Now the exterior one is just a plain circle, because if it was a hidden bottom, everything would fall out when we walk, or when your little guy or gal walks. So with the circle, I'm going to start pinning. And the key to circles is using lots and lots of pins. So, show you just how to do a couple. After the bottom is attached, you're going to want to go ahead and do a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Go slow, make sure you know where your straps are, because you don't want to sew your straps to the bottom of your bag. Okay. So here you get an idea of what it's going to look like. You're going to have lots and lots of pins, and then you're going to go ahead and sew it. The other thing is, we haven't talked about the interior of the bag. It's assembled exactly the same way, except for it's a solid piece of fabric. There's no piecing, and you have that great hidden bottom that we already added. The finished dimensions are the same, the seam allowances are the same, it's just a slightly different look with the solid fabric. Okay, so now I have our two pieces. I have our exterior, and I have our interior with that hidden bottom. They all have the stabilizer, and now the trick is, for most bags, it's assembling them. Sometimes the instructions could be a little wonky and they don't make sense, but pretty much what you're going to do is you're going to take the inside of your bag, right here, you're going to take the outside of it with right sides together, get your handles in there. Now this isn't beautiful, it's not great television, but you know, this is the way you assemble bags. Now, before we go anywhere, before I pin it, there's two seams right here. The seam for the outside of the bag and the seam for the inside of the bag. I'm going to take that to the sewing machine and tack it down quickly. The reason I'm doing this, and it's going to look a little wonky, but just a couple quick stitches. When you want to have a really clean, nice looking bag and you've done all this work, you don't want those seams to be wonky. You want them to match up. So, now that that's in place, you can go ahead and pin all the way around the perimeter. And I'll just show you a couple. So you pin, and once you do that, this is where you're going to do a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Okay. Okay, so the 1/2 inch seam allowance is going to be nice. You also have to think about, we have to get this bag right side out eventually, and that's after we do the 1/2 inch seam allowance. So I recommend you need to leave a seam allowance that's big enough for your fingers and your hands to get in there. For me, I can do a 3 to 4 inch opening. So you simply leave 3 or 4 inches open and pin the rest. So that way you can flip the bag right side out. Now no, if you have larger hands, just go ahead and make it a little bit bigger. And then once you flip the bag right side out, you're gonna finger press the opening. And I have one that we already sewed right here. I've also added a 1/2 inch or a 1/4 inch top stitch. That's gonna secure that 4 inch opening where we flipped our bag out. Now the exciting part is adding in these buttonholes. I've done the math for you. We need 8 to have a precise way to cinch it up. 8 seems to be the key method. So I have my 8 pins all the way around it. And before you do a buttonhole, it's really important to practice. I know so many people get scared and nervous of this, but I'm going to go ahead and mark where my buttonhole is going to go, and the directions have all this information. I'm going to go ahead and change my presser foot to my buttonhole. And what I did for the size of the buttonhole is I simply laid my strap in there, so I know my buttonhole knows exactly how much it needs to do. Now these machines are great. They're going to go ahead and they're going to create the buttonhole for you. All I have to do is get it lined up in the right spot and switch my machine to the buttonhole that I like. Okay, you pull the buttonhole feature down and then you press the presser foot and it does it all for you. This is the best kind of sewing when it's automated for you. And the machine will automatically stop when it's done. There we go. And now that we've done our practice buttonhole, I'm ready to show you what the finished product looks like. So I've already laced up the tie. I'm going to open it up and you can see all the buttonholes. Now this is Little M's bag.